So welcome everyone for day 2 of Protothon. We are so excited to have you back again. And yesterday we started with learning about problem discovery and really understanding what are your users' pain points, your customers' pain points, and what problem you want to solve. So today our speaker is building on once we narrowed down and we've come to terms with what problems we want to solve, what are the different ways we can solve for those problems. So really ideating a bunch of solutions, but also prioritizing which solutions and which features are important to be built into your MVP, because you have limited time, limited resources. You only have about 3 days for this hackathon. So what are the most important things that you need to put in your product to solve the biggest pain points for your users? So that's what today's session is going to be about. For agenda, we, like yesterday, we'll start off with some intro, which is what we're doing now. And then we'll, our workshop will run, the content will be presented for about 30 to 35 minutes. Then we'll move into Q&A towards the end. So my team will drop the Slido link below. And so feel free to add your questions there and vote questions that you wanted to be asked as well. And then some housekeeping items. We'd love to see your faces and get familiarized with all of you. So feel free to turn on your camera, use our Product Buds Protothon background as one of our swags. We ask that you keep yourself muted to avoid distracting our speaker. And also take notes and engage in the chat. We're so excited because our speaker today, Cheryl, has agreed to give away one engaged participant a chance to have a one-on-one coffee chat with her for 15 to 20 minutes. So all you have to do is to listen in, take notes, share your key takeaways on LinkedIn. That way you reinforce the learning for yourself, but also share it with others and add value to your network. So take notes, share it on LinkedIn, tag us, tag Product Buds, tag Cheryl, and Cheryl will be picking one lucky winner to have that coffee chat with. So without further ado, let's welcome Cheryl, who was actually a judge for our first Project Jam that happened last summer. So super thankful to have her back this time as a speaker for this workshop. So please take it away, Cheryl.
Thank you, Henrika. Hey, everyone. I'm going to start sharing my slides, and I'll also give you some details about me. Okay, so as you know, we're in the Solution Ideation and Feature Prioritization workshop. And some details about me. I'm currently a senior product manager at PlayStation. I focus mainly on trust and safety, so keeping users safe and making sure users trust the platform. I previously worked at Google and other startups like Credit Karma and Indiegogo, and I actually have made some career pivots before choosing that product manager is the right move and right fit for me. I was an analyst and a program manager before. So yeah, if you ever want to talk about career pivots, I'm happy to chat about that as well. And the agenda for today is going to be solution ideation and also the feature prioritization toolkit. So we're going to go more high level for the theory. And then after that, we're going to put all of that in action. And I'm going to show you what I actually do at work when I'm going through ideation and prioritization. And then we'll move into the takeaways for this session. So first, I just want to do a bird's eye view of what today's focus is. For the product development lifecycle, there are 4 main components. And the first one is problem definition. Who are the users? What's the user journey and the pain points? Problem prioritization. What's the most important problem to solve for? And what's going to make the most impact on your users? And then for what we're focusing on today, it's going to be on the latter, which are what are we assuming to be true in order to solve the problems that we need to, And if we have scoped out the solution we want, so which ones are going to make the most impact? And then, of course, the rest of the life cycle doesn't end there. There's also the execution of after you do prioritization, you're actually executing and implementing the solution. There's like the feedback that you get from users, and then you manage your backlog, etc. But we're not focusing too much on those, but we'll touch a bit on that. So essentially, for this entire process, you're really asking yourself a set of questions. And these questions that you ask yourself within this process is going to help put guardrails around your product. It's going to guide you in a more organized way in order to come up with the best decisions and product that you want to build. So first, we're going to go into solution hypothesis ideation toolkit. I've put down 3 different steps here within this ideation that I would go through. So first thing here is, how do you get started? After you've scoped out the problem, you have managed to understand what is the most high priority problem to solve for. You're going to do some research of what does the landscape look like? What has other kind of studies shown you? What has the industry done to solve the problem? So think of the problem like a puzzle. There's parts that you know to be true and parts that you don't. So I guess you're in this stage, you're really gathering enough information for you to understand what are the knowns that you have and what are the unknowns you need to go perhaps go validate through user surveys or user research. And then, yeah, so within this process, you'll start visualizing the user journey of if you know that there's a certain landscape, there's some statistics, there's some industry successes and failures, you can start understanding what are the different pain points users have within this user journey. And this would really help you when you start ideating the solutions. So next is, after you've done your research, this is going to really help you to make sure that your ideation with your team is going to be structured. So you add structure by having that user journey map and the prioritized pain points within that user journey. This would be, as I said, a collaborative brainstorming session where everyone should be aligned on what that user journey looks like and what the pain points are in order for you to generate the most kind of effective and best ideas you can, because everyone's aligned on kind of what is the problem, what's the most important thing to solve for. And doing the pre-work of coming up with the user journeys and pain points is going to add structure and going to avoid kind of the groupthink that could happen. So, for example, there may be a chance that there's a lot of agreement with the loudest person in the room. So if you're able to add that structure beforehand, the whole group can come to a more kind of rational and thought through solution that you guys are agreeing on because of the pain points you solve. So thinking holistically is going to get better and more effective ideas out there. So this is just an example, these 2 images of what does the user journey look like. So this is one way of doing it. I will show you how I do it later, but I usually do user journeys, which is the top image, through Google Drawing or Slides or some flowchart software like Lucid Charts. You kind of map out what does the user go through, search, discovery, commitment, and then you kind of map out what are the biggest pain points they have. And when you're brainstorming, that can be through Google Jamboard or Miro. I heard good things about that. Everyone, has their own board to put down their ideas, and then you start seeing kind of patterns of the different categories of problems that are coming up, and you kind of bucket them into logical groupings. So, for example, some solutions could be solving a problem from the back end or the front end, or revamping a process versus a user experience. So these are logical groupings that you can group them in to start visualizing the different ways in which this problem could be solved. And lastly, I want to call out that solution hypothesis ideation. It's called, I call it hypothesis for a reason. Because without the solution validation, we don't really know if the solutions actually work. So I would want to call out that these ideas still need to be validated to ensure that this will actually solve the user's problems. And so for the last piece of the solution ideation toolkit is now you have all these ideas from your ideation. It's time to collect them and zoom out to the bigger picture. You want to triage all these ideas, and you also want to tie it back to the problem statement you initially stated that is in scope, and that is the most important to solve. You want to clarify the goals you have to ensure that you're actually solving the problem, and that we can actually quantify how much of the problem is it solving. Is it only going to solve 5% of users' problems, or is it more 50%? Is it going to be, how big of an impact is it going to make on a user's life? For example, are we just, if problem is something, a process is too time consuming, are we cutting like half the time a user would spend in the process, which is a great thing? Or is it only cutting like a minute of their time in a week, which would not be as impactful? And lastly, you would also want to identify some KPIs, so key performance indicators towards solving the problem. So having these KPIs towards your goal is going to help you when you are actually going through each solution and trying to see how you prioritize them. It's going to allow you to compare oranges to oranges because you are mapping yourself to these KPIs, and this will allow you to see which ones are actually going to move the needle and which ones aren't. Okay, so that was solution ideation, and we're now going to go to feature prioritization toolkit. So the first one for feature prioritization is you've now identified your goals and your KPIs from solution ideation. You've already done half the work as far as how do you prioritize, or as far as establishing a prioritization framework. So now we'll do the other half, which is building out more of this framework. So for example, some attributes I would put, you'll see later that I have put this in a spreadsheet where you kind of compare ideas on these different attributes. Where, for example, you want to measure impact. How many users is it affecting? Is it affecting 80% of users in the platform? Is it 20? What is the impact of not doing anything? For example, if you work at a company, perhaps the impact of not doing anything could be we're violating the law, we're not complying with GDPR. Or for another case, it could just be users have a little worse experience, and the registration flow takes like a minute longer. So that could be something that isn't that impactful if you frame it that way. The other attribute is engineering cost. So how long is it going to take for the solution to be built? Is it a month? Is it a year, 2 years? That also helps in prioritizing what to do for MVP. And fourth, KPI is driving. So as I said in the last slide, we want to understand the goals and the KPIs of driving towards that goal. And if you're able to identify how the solution is going to drive the KPI, it will help you in comparing. And lastly, alternatives considered is also really important. So this is, you have a spreadsheet, you have these different, I see these attributes as spreadsheet column headers, where you're comparing solution ideation hypotheses against one another. And for these single ideas, you can have a lot of other alternatives to solve that problem. It doesn't have to be the one that you have ideated. And so I like thinking in that way, even if we don't choose the alternatives, because it forces you to think more broadly and not just a solution you post, so that you're thinking of other ways to solve the problem and you're not pigeonholing yourself to just using the kind of solutions you've come up with, and you're kind of mitigating risks by thinking of alternatives. So the second one for the feature prioritization is MVP should follow the 80-20 rule. So it means that 20% of effort should generate 80% impact. What this really means is that if we're thinking in iterations and where the MVP is the first iteration, you're going to have the second iteration, maybe the third iteration is like your vision and your long-term vision. The first iteration should be functional. It should work, and it should really solve the crux of the user problem as much as possible in the time frame that you have. Whereas nice to have features can come later, we should be really ruthlessly prioritizing, which is the next pillar. But yeah, nice to have should come later. MVP should really just be functional. Try to get it out the door in order to learn about the market as much as possible. And then the last point here is MVP is insufficient. Vision roadmaps are important as well. So if you know where you want to go in your long-term vision, so this could be, it could be 6 months out of this product, it could be a year, depending on what product you're trying to build. That vision will help guide you into what kind of MVP you are going to build in order to better solve that problem. So here's an example in this image of what I mean by MVP should be functional, and it shouldn't just be, for example, like a top. A wheel on a car is not going to be useful for the user, and at the bottom, so a car is where we want to be, which is the step 5, but a skateboard is functional enough. It solves the problem, the user problem of going from destination A to destination B. They're not super happy with it, but at least there is something that they are where it can actually solve the user problem of trying to go from destination A to destination B. And the last point here is ruthless prioritization. So following along the lines of having a functional MVP, cutting out nice to haves, and prioritizing what's the most important in solving the problem, we need to ensure that we have the discipline in doing that. And one way of making sure that there's a discipline of understanding and kind of defining what's MVP and what is the next iteration is being clear on what the trade-offs you can and cannot compromise. So this means once you understand the problem you're trying to solve and the solution that you have landed on, it's important to know what are you sacrificing, what are you not. So for example, it could be speed versus accuracy. Think of like Amazon. Like, do we care about more accurate results, or do we care that the results are given to you as quickly as possible to the user? Do we care about, for example, a Wikipedia page? Do we care that it's comprehensive, or do we care that it's just really high level, broad information? So being clear on what like your criteria is of what you can sacrifice and what you can't is going to help you much better align your team, and also for you as well to have a more logical and robust prioritization process. So then through this whole prioritization framework that you've built out and the trade-offs that you have thought through, you then start kind of, you can see more clearly of how to stack rank solution ideas against one another. So you'll see later in the case study where I have I prioritize by P0, priority 0, P1, P2, where P0 for me means urgent, must do an MVP. P1, it's more of a if we can do it in the MVP, great. It's a foundational to our strategy, but if we can't, then this should be the next iteration. And then P2 is just either it's nice to have, or it's just not that important, or it's just something we do later. So for stack ranking, I would use as my methodology of like P0, P1, P2. But it's also important to stack rank ideas against one another, even if they're in the same priority. So P0 features should be prioritized against one another. So you have a good sense of if you need to defer something, what is the first to go. And lastly, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There's advice I've gotten from a senior PM at Google before, where shipping a good product and getting something out the door faster in order to learn from the market is much better than trying to come up with the perfect product, taking a really long time, not really knowing how the market's going to respond to it, and that could be a waste of time if we're not if we're trying our best to solve the user problem, but we're not really getting it out the door at all until much later. So that's the other piece of advice. Okay, so now we've gone through both the solution ideation toolkit and the feature prioritization. I'm now going to go through an example of solving for pet owner pain points. And this would show you my own process of how I do this. So I just picked a random problem that I've seen in interview questions lately, product manager interview questions, and for pet owners. And so I'm going to go through this example. I won't spend too much time on the problem definition and prioritization, just because I think you guys have gone through that yesterday in the workshop. But this is going to help kind of set up the solution ideation and prioritization better later. So the problem definition that I have posed here is that it's time-consuming and cumbersome for pet owners to figure out pet logistics. So pet logistics meaning they got a pet, they need to figure out which insurance to get, who's going to take care of their pet when they're on vacation or at work, what are home amenity needs they need. So how much space does the pet need? What kind of food do they need? What kind of bed do they need? How big are they going to grow? And therefore we need to account for how many more things we need to get, equipment we need to get for the house. So this leads to a lot of unnecessary stress on pet owners and less time for the pet and the pet owner to enjoy each other's company. So here I've created a user journey in these bubbles. I usually do this through Google Drawing, but for the sake of this exercise, I put it in slides. And so I guess for this one, I've identified the user, which is the pet owner. I have put in the kind of the user journey of a pet owner goes through research about their a pet that they want. They actually get the pet, they adopt or they buy. They settle in with the pet, so they they get the pet. They need to start looking into insurances, register the pet, and then they have to actually maintain the pet as well. So it is what do they do when they go on vacation, or how can we make sure we don't feed the pet too much food so they get too fat or something like that. And then we look at what currently exists in the market. So I did some quick research and I saw that there's these apps that existed. Apps that let you record the medical records of a pet, pet home cameras, where someone can go walk your dog, etc. Let's say we've done some user feedback to understand how these apps are faring as well. And lastly, I've also kind of thought through some pain points that comes with the pet owner journey. So for example, it could be when you're doing research, and this pain point isn't really just about when you're doing research. I think it could be all throughout these stages. But for example, you may not have enough information about the pet and the breed and how much, for example, some pets have more illnesses than others because of their breed. That could lead to higher insurance and vet costs. Those type of details may be useful in kind of calculating cost for a pet. And then there's other pain points here of a pet owner needs the right insurance, they need the right home amenities and need to socialize their pet, etc. So I've named all these pain points. Next is then the prioritization of these pain points. So in this process of pain point prioritization, you want to know what has already been well solved for by the current market, what hasn't been solved for, and would make a big impact on the pet owner's life. And the other question you want to think about is also, what's a fundamental pain point that can make other pain points go away or mitigate their impact? So what I've prioritized here is this one, where if you have more information on the breed, maybe on the temperament of the pet, it'll be better in informing insurance costs, vet costs, in whether, because temperament also dictates what kind of socialization and training the pet needs. So it informs a lot of different logistics. So I guess like within this exercise, I viewed that this pain point is a fundamental pain point that would make a lot of these pain points easier to deal with. So once you know, uh, like how much illness this breed of pet gets usually in their lifetime, it may be easier for you to understand what kind of insurance you need, etc. So now then we go through solution hypotheses ideation. As I mentioned, it should be a structured brainstorming, and you make sure that it's structured by first going through the user journey with your team, picking out the pain points and prioritizing the pain points. After that, you start the session with emphasizing these goals and these problem and pain points. So everyone's aligned on what they're trying to solve for, and it's not random ideas that people are putting out. And then you try to bucket these ideas in different categories so you can kind of see patterns. So if you remember in the last slide, the pain point we prioritize is if pet owners has more information about the breed of the pet or the overall cost, et cetera, it's going to make their lives easier when they need to make decisions or like come up or understand resolve pet logistics. So I have sections of we should just give pet owners more information. One is like we should make sure we kind of do like a insurance comparison for pet insurance and to let them know the details of the pros and cons of each so they can make a better decision that way. So this is kind of the type of information that we can give out for the solution. Another way of giving pet owners more information could be just giving them a social platform. So for example, if you see here, if we are for pet owner Q&A forum. So if, for example, if we built a platform where pet owners can ask each other questions, and answer each other's questions, then that might serve as a form of information for pet owners and therefore help them make better decisions about their pets and ownership. Another category could be, well, we can go a step further of what we really want for pet owners is help them with decision making, and it's not necessarily about the information. So perhaps we go a step further. Instead of just giving them information, we help them make the decisions. So this solution could be a personalized decision making thing for pet owners. And after you have done this ideation with your team, you're going to have a list of ideas. You would triage them. So what I've done here, I just like put all the ideas that you've seen in the Jamboard on the last slide and just put them on a spreadsheet. And I started filling out the kind of prioritization framework attributes. So for example, what's the description? So we have an idea. What would we think the spec would look like? How would we visualize this solution in coming to life? What's the impact of the solution? So it doesn't have to be, so HML just means high, medium, low. You don't have to do it like that. You can also be more specific of this idea is going to affect 80% of users. And this idea is going to reduce the time reduce like 30 minutes that a user has to spend each day. And 30 minutes each day is significant. So that you can go into more details there. Impact of not doing or alternatives. So you can think through if we don't do nothing, what alternatives we will have. So for example, for this one, we want to give like Wikipedia-like information for pets. However, an alternative is they can go on Wikipedia. So this may make that fact might make this idea less useful because there's already an alternative that exists. And of course, engineering costs. Which is how long is it going to take to build? And then solution validation status, which is, as I said, these are just hypotheses. We should definitely validate them. So making sure that they're validated is also useful in coming up with which ideas are the best. I guess as you can see here, ideas naturally split out into different categories of what's a short-term feature and what's more medium, what's long-term, what are irrelevant features we should just throw out, and what are nice to haves. And the next slide will start separating them more clearly from each other. But for now, I will note here that this is a good way after you've done the prioritization framework to start thinking through what is the MVP versus what is the long-term vision. And it starts being more clear after you fill out the framework. And for me, just for the sake of this exercise, I have named the MVP and product vision here. The product vision here is we want to go a step further than just information. We want to have like personalized decision maker for pet owners. And how do we get there from the MVP? So pets have in their lifetimes are going to need insurance, some registry, lots of like home amenities, and we can like do some general cost projections throughout their lifetime of like what kind of, for example, what kind of doctor visits and kind of like illnesses that they need to kind of solve for in their lifetime that may help the pet owners a lot. So I scoped the MVP that way and also the product vision.
Before Cheryl, there
Yes.
are really good questions in the chat if you're down to quickly answer some of them. So
Sure.
you've mentioned cost projection a lot. We have a question from Shalini. How is cost projection performed? So how do you project cost? Yeah, and what cost are we talking about here?
Yeah. So, for the sake of this exercise, what I mean here is just for, let's just say, a golden retriever, a dog. We know that for that breed, there are certain diseases that they're prone to, and that they need a certain amount of space. They need like a certain amount of food, if you know that that type of dog lives like 15 years. Then perhaps then you kind of can work backwards and understand, okay, throughout their lifetime, they're going to need X amount of food. They're going to need doctor visits, especially from their age 10 to 15, and these are the diseases that they are prone to. So these kind of projections could be helpful for pet owners. So yeah, that's what I mean when I say cost projections.
Sounds good. And then last one over here is it common practice to add weights to the different attributes? Sort of like a weighted matrix in terms of prioritization. So this question is from
Yeah, that's a good question. I was going to mention that a little in like 2 slides later. However, I think it depends. So for me and other product managers I've seen, we don't really do that on a day-to-day practice of like adding weights and having a super methodical framework. You kind of have that intuition after you've done it for a while. However, I think as a product manager getting started, it's good to do that just so you can keep yourself honest in understanding what's more important and what's not. It's also really good for interviews. Interviewers really like it when you have something methodical. And it's also good for communication. If you're communicating to like a director or VP, like it's good for them to know that you thought about it, and like it's a rational way of putting it on a slide when you're communicating your prioritization.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yep. Okay, great questions. A few more slides and then Q&A. So after we've done the ideation, we've done a first level kind of solution prioritization framework, we should clarify what exact problem are we trying to solve for, what's the goal, and what's the KPIs. So if you remember before, the problem statement that was posed was very broad. It was more like pet owners have a very cumbersome process in figuring out their pet logistics. It could be finding someone to help walk or sit their dogs. And we think that if we can give them information, then that would make their lives better. So the more specific problem we want to solve for now, it's still within the same lines of our problem statement, but I think this is more specific. which is pet owners currently are not equipped with the information for them to make key decisions about owning a pet. And it's important. It's note that it's also important when you're posing a problem statement, it's good to mention impact. So the second sentence is, this can lead to low pet owner pet happiness because of unexpected costs, poor pet health, and really time-consuming process and doing research. So then the product goal here is we want to simplify the pet owner decision-making process by giving them information or just by making recommending decisions for them. We can spin that however via like the feature kind of ideation. And this goal would allow pet owners and pets to have more time to enjoy each other's companies. So then once you have that goal, I would then put down the KPIs that we want to measure ourselves against. So think of it as like your team dashboard, like these KPIs define whether you're successful or not. So first one is you want to maximize happiness level of, so AKA customer satisfaction of the pet owners. You could probably do this through a user survey or through like their kind of a mobile app feedback or rating. The second one is you want to minimize the pet owner time spent in evaluating options and decisions so that they're spending less time on trying to make a decision and they're spending more time on enjoying time with their pets. And so after we've clarified the product goal and KPIs, we go into kind of the feature prioritizations. And so and just to be clear on what this means is we have done the solution prioritization, which is we have identified the solution that we want for MVP and also the longer term vision of what that product looks like. Is now time for us to figure out, okay, so within that solution we have picked, what are the different features within that solution that we need to execute in order to make that solution happen. And so within that, the first question, the next question I would ask myself is, what are the non-negotiables and what are we willing to compromise? So think of it as I said earlier, what are we willing to sacrifice and versus what we're not, now that we know our product goal and KPIs. So for example, for this pet owner exercise, the non-negotiable here is we need to make sure that we have quality information for these pet owners, because if it's not quality and it's not accurate, then it's not going to be helpful for them in making decisions. We need to ensure ease of use. We should make sure that the app or website, whatever it is that we're building, is going to be easy and intuitive to use and also fast. And a negotiable, and the thing we can sacrifice here is the social aspect. So for example, like the problem here is about making sure we are helping pet owners in a more effective decision-making process. So the social aspect of like building a Q&A platform, for example, where pet owners can answer each other's questions could be useful, but it's not like a core problem to solve for. So therefore, it may be something we can sacrifice within the MVP. And I guess let me explain this spreadsheet first before I go to the prioritization framework for MVP. So this spreadsheet is just, if we're thinking about between the MVP, which is like the cost projections of a pet's lifetime, and all the way to the long-term vision of what do we want to ensure pet owners have better decision-making. These are the features that I came up with. Okay, we need to ensure that there's some authentication, like we need to ensure pet owners can sign in some way. That's a P0 because it's, we want to make sure that users can sign in to an app. So it must happen. It needs to be a functional app. Another one could be like we need to make sure pet owners probably care a lot about like veterinarian doctor costs. And so therefore, that might be something that we want to do first as an MVP, versus maybe it's not as important for us to give information about how much exercise the pet needs. So that's kind of how I listed all the features kind of put them in pillars. So these pillars are, again, kind of bucketing them in kind of natural categorizations. So authentication is in authentication. Kind of the information we want to surface is in information for the pet owner. Okay, so and then going to then the prioritization framework for MVP, these are the questions I ask myself to understand what should be P0, P1, and P2. So again, the first question is, what must an MVP have for it to work? This example here, authentication. So therefore, authentication must be done. Second question is, what is a foundational item for us to get closer to our strategy or / vision? So for me, that would be P1. So what I guess like an example here is we want to make sure that we have home amenity needs as a source of information for pet owners, and it's foundational because perhaps in the vision we want to do personalized recommendations of like dog toys to pet owners, because that would be a personalized decision making, and therefore this is categorized as P1 because it's a foundational item to that strategy. And the last one is just what will help us acquire more users and deliver more customer value and delight. That's P1 or P2, depending. And so this could be, for example, a community Q&A forum, which is a P2, where like it may help us acquire more users because there's a network effect with these kind of social platforms, and therefore will acquire more users. However, it's not critical for MVP, so let's put it as P2. And I guess just to mention again, there are many frameworks in prioritizing. If you just, I guess, look up product management prioritization frameworks, there's a lot. There's like something called RICE, like reach, impact, confidence, effort, and it allows you to do lots of weights in calculating what the prioritization score is. So there's a lot of structure that you can do there that you could look into. Second to last slide is we then go to the feature roadmap. I guess from all these slides, you may be able to understand that prioritization isn't just like a one-time thing. Prioritization is continuous. So and prioritization happens in different cuts. So you first saw that in like probably in the problem prioritization, and then you saw that in a solution prioritization, solution ideation prioritization, and then now also feature prioritization. So from the last spreadsheet, which I just showed you, we kind of noted down the impact and costs for each feature. And now we're going to more logically put them into what iteration does this feature fit in, or does it not fit in at all? And therefore is a backlog item, which is at the bottom of the spreadsheet. So there's more questions to ask yourself to understand whether something is in the MVP, in the next iteration, in the vision, etc. One is what drives the most impact toward the goal? How much effort is it going to take? And what are the risks and consequences you should plan for? So that one's important too, because if the product has a lot of risks associated and we're not able to work on mitigating those risks for MVP, then perhaps we shouldn't work on that feature at all until later when we have time to mitigate those risks as well. And lastly, as I said, prioritization is continuous. Being able to understand how things are prioritized, and even better, how does your, for example, P0 stack rank against one another, would help you when you need to defer a feature, because then you know what your must-haves are, and you know how the must-have stack rank against each other when push comes to shove. And you would know when you need to defer a feature, I guess, like when you're following the engineering implementation progress, and you find that things are slipping, and that is an indication to you that there may be a deferral that's needed, and we should better prepare for it by making sure we know what should be sacrificed first. So I've talked a lot. We're at the end. I want to give you 3 takeaways. The first one is ask yourself these questions. I guess I've thrown a lot of questions you should ask yourself within this product development lifecycle. But for me, what it really boils down to, what I'm constantly asking myself throughout this whole process is, what problem are we solving for? Are we solving the right problem? And is it the right solution for the right problem? And are we prioritizing what's going to make the biggest impact? So I would, if there's an overwhelming amount of questions that are thrown at you, I think of these 3 or 4, and this would better help you and guide you in your process. Second one is being problem-driven and not solution-driven. It takes a lot of discipline to not do that, and I think asking yourself these questions throughout the life cycle of product development is going to help you make sure you're not just pigeonholing yourself to being really excited about this one solution, but it may not solve the user problems. I definitely struggled with that when I first started being a product manager, so I think that's why I keep myself disciplined with these questions I ask as well. And the last one is just making sure you keep your end goal in mind and then work backwards. So what this means is make sure that even if we have an MVP, we know where we're trying to go. We know where our vision is. And then work backwards to make sure the MVP is going to align with that longer term vision that you have. That will make your product a lot more successful. So with that, I want to thank you. I'm done. Happy to move to Q&A.
How does everyone feel about that? Lots of knowledge and insights and really techniques that you can apply directly this weekend on the hackathon, but also if you're an existing PM or trying to break into PM, so much value from that. So type in the chat, from 1 to 5, how did you find that? 5 being super bomb, and also click those reaction buttons as well to show your love and appreciation for Cheryl. And then now we'll be moving into Q&A for the next about like 5 minutes. So let's start with our most voted questions. So how do you convince stakeholders that a specific feature is a must-have versus a nice-to-have? So, and how do you handle conflicting feature priorities from different users of your product?
Super great question. For me, I always go with the data. And of course, sometimes you don't know, right? It's a hypothesis whether your new feature is going to be useful in the market. But for me, it's usually about the data of users are having this pain. And for example, maybe through user complaints in a company, you see that 80% of users have this complaint. And if we can solve for that pain point, then this would, for example, it would decrease the customer support costs because users aren't complaining about this to customer support anymore. So you could convince, for example, the PM for customer support with that kind of logic. And for other departments, it could be the same thing, right? Like we are solving that user pain point, we're minimizing costs or maximizing costs. And like through data points is how I would usually convince stakeholders. How do you handle conflicting feature priorities from different users? So I think then you need to understand how do the different users prioritize against one another. I think it depends. There's 2 scenarios. One is perhaps one type of user is is more important than another in this year's roadmap. So for example, I used to work at Google where like there's the user, there's the actual end user, Google user, and there's the developer. And for us, there was one year we just prioritized developer more over the user because it was more strategic for us to, if we solve the developer problem, we solve the user problem. So there's that scenario, but the other scenario is also those 2 users are equally important. However, I guess like it depends on the impact again, like the percentage impact of that pain point and how effective we're solving for it. And that's how I would manage that conflict as well.
So lots of prioritization, not just prioritizing the problems you want to solve, but also the users that you want to solve for and the features that you want to build. So yeah, lots of prioritization and asking of questions. And then we'll take this question from Lucent. How do you ensure that your product's vision can be achieved in the timeline or roadmap you've laid out?
Yeah. I think if you're working at a company, it may be hard, just because, like, let's just say you want your roadmap to be realized in a year, but then you have a lot of dependencies on other teams. Then other teams have their own priorities, and then could push out your vision. So I think it's good. It's always good. I guess, like, the future vision should, for me, be 3 to 5 years to realize. You are in constant alignment with your stakeholders, and slash your dependency product manager teams, in understanding and making sure they align with your vision, and making sure their priorities are aligned with yours. You're doing a lot of evangelization with this vision, by kind of always doing the presentations on your vision to other people, to make sure they're excited and they remember your vision, and they understand, they agree with it. And that's how you kind of make sure it's achieved in, even if it's not like in the 1 year roadmap, it could be, 3 to 5 years. So it's a lot of really pitching and convincing people.
Yes, a lot of really influencing and getting buy-in for the various stakeholders that you have. So thank you for that. Let's ask this last one. What type of KPIs would you define if you use a value-driven model versus a cost-driven model for the product that you are building? So metrics, I guess, in general.
Okay, I hope I understand this question correctly. Value driven, I assume it's not about cost. It could be, for example, in my space, in the space I'm in, it's like, how many users are we protecting on the platform, versus cost is we want to minimize costs. So I think for cost driven, it's more cut and dry. It's easier because you already have numbers to prove it, and you constantly have that number to prove it. But when it's value driven, like my space and safety, is definitely harder, where you have to rely on perhaps user surveys to understand, for example, do users feel more safe on the platform or not? And that could be tougher. However, there could be other ways of understanding whether they feel safe. It could be, for example, you use a proxy of how much are people using privacy settings. That could be an indicator that they feel trust or safe, or whatever it is. There are proxies, but really the real thing is user surveys and understanding their customer satisfaction. So that's how I would answer that question.
That's great. So, and then I know I said that was the last one, but since we have a lot of newbies who are starting and trying to get into product management, maybe like a quick, definition, explanation is, what is the difference between an MVP and a prototype? And then we'll talk.
Yeah, I guess in my opinion, maybe other people have other opinions. I think a prototype is before an MVP. A prototype is something that you are using when you perhaps are validating your idea, and you want to, for example, show your prototype to users in the form of user research to understand how they react to your product. And after that, you iterate on your prototype, and then you settle on and you scope out an MVP. And the MVP would be the thing you actually launch to the market, and to get user feedback.
That is my understanding as well. So for everyone who doesn't know, MVP stands for minimum viable products. So ideally, when you have a prototype where you use to test with your users, what you learn from testing your prototype would feed into what goes into your MVP, or what your MVP would be made out of. Yeah. So thank you so much, Cheryl. I'll close with some um, few announcements over here. Let me quickly share my screen. But how did everyone found that? We just learned so much, but don't you worry, because we're going to have the recording uploaded so you can review it later on. But hopefully you took some really great notes and you're ready to share your insights to your team to apply it over the weekend, but also to your network on LinkedIn, as Cheryl will be picking one lucky winner who would get a chance to have a one-on-one coffee chat with her, so you can further get to know um, her work, and her background, and just how she got into her career. And then some few announcements. So mentor contact info has been sent out. So if you go to the Product Buds Protothon channel, there you'll find a Google sheet where it outlines who your mentor is and what their availability is over the weekend. So you can reach out to your mentor and schedule those calls in advance. So all of those will be found there. We also have our PBPJ Essentials link here, which that basically outlines, it's a quick primer and brochure of everything that you need to know about PBPJ in a FAQ format. So please refer to those. And lastly, hope you enjoyed this session. And we have another one tomorrow with Andrew, who was here earlier. I'm not sure if he's still around, but definitely catch him tomorrow as we continue on our series of workshops. So thank you, everyone.